this is Pico Entertainment, and we are back again. And we're just going to do a quick update on the recent events on the tennis tour. Apologies, I've had recent issues with my editing software, so I haven't been able to do this video sooner. But the most recent event, as we all know within tennis, was the cancellation of the Wimbledon Championships. As we all know, is the most prestigious, the most oldest tennis tournaments within the whole tour, the Grand Slams tournament. And yeah, this is the first time within its history that it's had to be postponed. It was due to take place on the 29th of June, run through to the 12th of July. And in keeping really with all sporting events, we had the Olympics cancelled, we had the European football championships being cancelled as well. We've had recently the Golf Open Championships have been cancelled, football leagues and tournaments, and various other films and movies I've covered in other videos. So this is no shock, this was no surprise. The problem you have here is that because Wimbledon is on the grass, you see, which really you can only play in the summer months, your sort of June, July, August, that sort of period, that's the only really time you can really afford to play any kind of grass tennis. And as we know, the grass season is the shortest amongst the whole tennis tour, right? It only goes on for about, what, a month or two, if that. So I originally, in other videos, stated that maybe they could shift this back to August, but unfortunately, with the ongoing cases that we've had in the UK now, with this virus situation here, unfortunately now the death toll's shot up now to over 4,000 in the UK now. They're very much mirroring at the moment the going rate of what happened in Italy. So it just wasn't feasible, it wasn't possible to put this tournament at the end of June. So they made the right decision. I think nobody can complain. You know, there's no issues or kind of any outrage or controversy in the decision that they made. You know, this is something they would have thought long and hard about, and they've just looked at the current scenario and just realised it's just not going to improve to the point where you can start asking people to come together again. As I've explained in previous videos, this isn't a one-day event, is it? This is going to happen over 2 weeks, and you're going to have thousands of people coming from all over the world, mixing in together, being condensed in very densely populated areas, to coming in and out of the various courts, right? So it just wasn't really a viable option. So they've done the right decision, in my opinion. So the really ultimate question is now, what does it mean for the tennis tour? Because we've had the cancellations since the Indian Wells, right? So the whole clay court season's been cancelled. French Open has been moved to September. I'll talk about that in a minute. And now the ATP Tour stated that there's going to be no active tennis until July the 13th. So basically, we're at the halfway stage. We've only really managed to complete the Australian Open and the and various other tournaments before that as well. So it does beg the question now: is tennis going to be cancelled for the whole year? I didn't think it was. I thought it'd be able to pick up later on, halfway through the year, but it's just looking increasingly likely now it's not the case. I mean, I mentioned about the UK, but the US as well. I mean, they're having way more incidences and infections and deaths as well. So you really have to question whether the US Open, which is due to take place in, I think, the end of August, isn't it? And then the proposed plan was to have the French Open take a week later. Is that really viable? You know, so it wouldn't surprise me if the tour ended up being cancelled for the whole year. It really wouldn't at this point. You know, you just can't. You have to understand that when tennis players play, they can't just have months of inactivity, right? And then just jump on a plane and play a Grand Slam tournament. They need, you know, those preparation tournaments in between, those master tournaments, the 1000s, the 500s, the 250s, etc. They need those matches to build their form and make sure they're match ready for the Grand Slams, right? So they're going to have none of that, essentially, and then you can ask them to come into the US Open, come into the French Open, and it's just, you know, it's looking very unlikely. You know, you can't expect that. I mean, players can practice, but you also have to remember, because of the lockdowns and the quarantine and the social distancing, the players are limited to what they can practice against, right? I'm pretty sure the top players, you know, like Nadal, Federer, Serena, I'm sure they'll have some sort of practice court, or, you know, some area they can go and play and hit a couple of balls on. But the lower ranked players and the richer players, you know, what are they going to do? How are they going to practice? You know, you still got to practice against someone. I suppose it's still safe to practice because with an opponent because you're kind of a further distance away as you practice, but still that can be debated itself. But yeah, it just I just wouldn't be surprised if the whole tour got cancelled. We have the whole controversial incident still, as I mentioned before, with the French Opening moving to September, a week after the US Open, and yeah, it's coming out now. They kind of really broke rank and just made a decision by themselves, and a lot of people within the ATP, the players, and other kind of head officers were not very happy that they just announced that decision. So we'll have to still wait and see whether they actually stick to that. Again, it all relies on the current scenario and how that changes. So yeah, it's just a really unfortunate situation right now. I know people have said, well, it could this be both the last Wimbledon that we see both Serena and Roger Federer, right, who are both 38 now. Many would have said that the championships this year would have been their last Wimbledons, before they retire, right? So will they be able to maintain themselves for next year's? We all know that the grass court, because of the speed and the kind of quickness of the points, that it both allows both Serena and Roger their most likely chance of getting another slam, as opposed to like the French Open, where the rallies are going to be longer. The points are going to be tougher to win, right? So yeah, that was another interesting point. I know the ATP as well stated that the ranking points will be frozen, as we've talked about before. No issues there. So yeah, it's a really just difficult time for the tour at the moment. The other recent news was that the US Open have decided to make space for 350 beds in the Billie Jean King Court within Flushing Meadows for the people who were suffering or infected with this disease. So that's very good. It's always great to see sport helping out in these current times and situations going on. So that was very good of them to do that. But again, people have raised the issue. Well, if you're going to have people in hospital beds who are kind of suffering from this disease or trying to get over the disease, how can you then have the tournament basically like in September? Won't that kind of leave people open to potentially get infected by it as well? You see, so that's the kind of dilemma that you're stuck in again. So yeah, that's not really a lot more we can kind of report on. Just again, I'm sort of catching up because apologies, I've had issues with my editing software. Could do a whole video on that, but I won't. But yeah, it's just at the moment looking increasingly likely that the tour is going to be cancelled right now for the whole year. And I've mentioned before in other videos, you have the facility to do that more in tennis, because the tour kind of came to a standstill kind of March, didn't it? So nothing's been started and then been interrupted, right? All the points, all the events, rankings, etc. could just be stopped now, and then you could just start again next year, as opposed to other sports such as football, where you're kind of 2/3 of the way through the league, so there's still a bit of remaining activity to complete. Which tennis, no, the tour has stopped now, so you could eventually say rest for the end of the year, and then that just allows players to know where they are exactly, and they can just prepare themselves for the beginning of 2021. That's what I think is eventually going to happen. At the most, if you were going to get activity, it might be a case of, let's say, if the cases decline a lot more, we may get like an end of the year celebratory like event where all players just kind of come together and they play, maybe behind closed doors, just a celebratory event to kind of signal the end, and maybe the tour will come back next year. I could probably see something like that happening, but apart from that, yeah, it's not looking good for the tennis at all. But that's my overall thoughts on just the recent cancellation of Wimbledon, and the fact that it's looking increasingly likely that the whole tour for the year be cancelled. Just unprecedented times, really. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think they'll be able to somehow carry on with the French Open and the US Open? Do you think it does relate a lot more on whether the cases decline a lot? Will we be able to actually pick up the year end of the tour? How will players react physically and mentally to kind of really being out of the tour for what? I guess it's 3 to 4 months now it's going to be by the end of July. So yeah, just very unprecedented times, as I mentioned before. But those are my thoughts for now. I'll keep providing you with coverage as I go along. Hopefully, I won't have any more issues with my editing software, and I'll be able to do this much more real time and up to date for you. But those are my thoughts for now. So just please like and subscribe, and keep washing your hands, keep staying safe distances, take care of yourselves for now, and I will see you very, very soon.